Hello and welcome to Discussion Boards as Effective Assessments, student-centered 21st century learning in the remote learning realm. This webinar will focus on two essential questions. How do you avoid predictable, shallow discussions? How do you encourage substantive, thought-provoking engagement? In terms of my background, I'm MJames from Union Catholic High School. I teach through 9 through 12 grades. And I also teach for the 6 through 16 fully online program at Union Catholic High School, as well as for the dual enrollment program with St. Thomas Aquinas College. I am a completely online instructor for the Virtual High School Consortium, which is a global consortium, and an adjunct professor at Mercer and Brookdale Community Colleges. In total, I have been teaching online for over 10 years in both fully online courses as well as the blended learning realm. I am certified in Canvas, Blackboard, D2L, and Angel. I have 12 graduate credits in educational technology, along with 2 master's degrees. And I tell you that because 56 of those credits were taken through online classes. So I practice what I preach. I fully believe in online learning, that it can be very effective. And I, in fact, have done that myself. In terms of research, today I'd like to talk about discussion boards as effective assessments. And the experts say that discussion boards can be very effective in terms of engaging students and providing positive learning outcomes. They often are superior to peer-to-peer interaction in a face-to-face discussion in the classroom. Some of the things to remember in terms of instruction when you're setting up a discussion: the instructor needs to provide time to reflect, research, and compose thoughts. And a little bit later on, I'll share my feedback that I've received from students over the years. And this is one area that they are very positive with regard to their responses to discussion boards. They really appreciate having that time to prepare their responses to a prompt, as opposed to when you're in a face-to-face classroom and the students are simply raising a hand in terms of responding to the teacher's question. Discussion boards also give them the opportunity to view, respond to, and expand on the work of others, apply critical thinking skills, which we all try to incorporate into our courses, write with a purpose and for an audience. And there's also a high level of reflection when using discussion boards correctly. Some other advantages: more equal participation. In a face-to-face classroom, we typically have that one person, or maybe it's a few students, who are always raising hands. On the other hand, sometimes the very brightest, the student that does 120% when it comes to homework, but never raises a hand or offers something verbally in the classroom. This sort of flips around when you're in an online discussion. Oftentimes, those very bright students who don't like to participate verbally are very vocal in an online discussion board. As I mentioned, there's a reduction in anxiety and intimidation because they have time to prepare responses, flexibility of conversation based on understandings as that progresses over time. And also, in the atmosphere we're in now, whether you're teaching remotely or you're teaching in a hybrid situation, we are asynchronous a lot of the time. And this provides really strong asynchronous interaction. Students, as they approach the discussion board, we don't want to just jump in and throw a discussion board at them without some preparation. One of those things that is really good for preparation is a set of netiquette guidelines. Now, I create my own initially for my seniors. I have my seniors create them. And we do that through a discussion board assignment. Seniors in the first posts offer some guidelines they think should be for our class for discussion boards. And then through subsequent posts, we identify the best of those guidelines, narrow the sets down, and come up with a classroom set. This helps students to gain ownership of their learning. They feel like they're involved in the process and what's taking place. I also provide a rubric I like to have as much transparency as possible up front. Giving them the rubric to begin with is very, very helpful. They understand the expectations that I have of them, and they understand how to meet those. Naming conventions depend on the platform you're using for LMS. Many of the platforms, D2L, for example, enables a student to respond to a given prompt and then label with a title his or her response, giving a clue as to the direction that response is taking for the instructor and for classmates as well. Deadlines. I always encourage deadlines to be strict. I'm a strong believer in universal design, and the foundation of that is firm goals, flexible means. So firm goals in terms of initial posts and follow-up posts. And also modeling. It's important for the instructor to be in that discussion board, modeling those etiquette guidelines, and also modeling other requirements of a specific discussion board assignment. How they interact obviously does matter. The etiquette rules should encourage respectful, courteous discussions and responses. As I said, I often get the students involved in creating rules, and modeling, especially in that first week, is very, very important to get off on the right start. This is my set of etiquette guidelines. And you'll see the first thing I say is, remember, you're conversing with other human beings. When we're online, sometimes we have that feeling of being anonymous to a certain extent, and we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that we're respectful, we're courteous, we treat each other as humans. Always sign your post, and typically in an LMS, it comes up, the post comes up as labeled with the student's name, but it's just nice to sign in the bottom, Alex, Trudy. It's nice to have that name in there. Don't shout, avoid the text use of caps. We don't want to shout at each other. Stay on topic. Also using formal English, no text language. However, emoticons can be helpful in an online discussion because we often don't see emotion in an online discussion. So those can be helpful. That being said, I do not restrict the students to responding with text only. Even though they have the text box provided, I also allow them to respond in audio format, in video, or in multimedia format. Be positive, encourage each other's, and also think before posting. Do not criticize. You may think you're being helpful offering some correction, but, and I'm talking about students offering correction to each other, but it really needs to be thought out before it's posted. Now, in addition to using discussion boards as assessments, they can also be great icebreakers to build community. Would you rather is a great prompt. What fruit would you want to be? Sounds a little boring on the surface, but believe it or not, it generates some really interesting discussions. Kids come up with all kinds of things like star fruit and ugly fruit and, you know, things that you wouldn't normally think of. Creating personal icons for themselves online, and even doing laundry lists, especially as we start in the fall. Students are coming off a summer vacation, favorite pizzas, favorite thing they did this summer, could even be their favorite way to de-stress during the pandemic, and some things that they went through in the spring during emergency remote learning. Establishing learning goals, as I mentioned, firm goals, flexible means. Align the goals with your course objectives, with New Jersey state standards. Identify knowledge and skills that you want the students to use or develop, and be clear with your instruction. Be detailed, over detailed in terms of what you want the students to do and how you want them to respond, what deadlines you tend to implement. Some possible learning goals, and what I'm going to do is give you some sample lessons for each of these. Demonstrate knowledge of key concepts, apply critical thinking skills, and this could be to a text, a graph, a map, a video. You could use several formats for this. Building consensus, perhaps creating a product, reaching a compromise, drawing conclusions, and reflect and share. Describe how concept or situation or experience has personal connections. Maybe they're working on a particular question, and then you're asking them to bring a personal real life situation that they've experienced into the conversation. One thing that is different about discussion boards versus a typical assignment is that in a discussion board, you go beyond that student to teacher transmission. And typical task that the student completes, the knowledge is transferred between student and teacher. In a discussion board, the students are sharing that knowledge with each other and helping each other to grow their learning. It also often encourages more detailed exploration of key concepts. I find my kids getting competitive and going for outside research, trying to deepen that discussion. And it really helps to improve the understanding of a given topic. This is the new version of Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm going to show you some ideas that align with each level in the pyramid. Most of you sometime in your career have come across that old version of Bloom's taxonomy. You'll notice this is a bit different. The top point in particular is now creating, followed by evaluating, analyzing, etc. So if we take a look at some samples for each of those, in terms of creating, let's start from the top of the pyramid. Using a lesson rubric to design a class assignment. Have the students go from a rubric to design an assignment that aligns with that rubric. Evaluating. Critiquing the validity, bias, authority of a source, and the source can be provided by you, or you can have the students find the source and then critique it. Analyzing. Comparing and contrasting arguments or prioritizing reasons for a given event. Say you're teaching history, French Revolution. What were the causes or reasons for the French Revolution? Which was the most significant? Applying principles of ACORN, PEG, or another acronym, whatever acronym you use to assess primary and secondary source documents. It aligns with applying on Bloom's pyramid. Understanding, identifying key points of a primary, secondary source, or maybe it's key points of a video. Remembering groups, use a collaborative approach, identifying causes and or effects, or create a list of resources on a given topic. Have the students create the resources from which they're going to learn or which they're going to prepare for perhaps a summative exam. Avoid single response questions. This is one definite no for the discussion board. Do not create questions that can be answered with yes or no. It stifles the discussion. The discussion board just really doesn't go anywhere with those kinds of closed-ended questions. So we want open-ended questions, probing questions, support or refute a given stance, something that asks the students to create an argument, provide evidence, and then defend it. Comparing and contrast themes in English, issues in government, probing motives or causal relationships can even be used in a science class. Some alternative prompts: create a hypothetical situation and have the students respond to that. Prioritize, I think I mentioned before, identifying the most important issues. Role play. Many history teachers, myself included, do things like speed dating in the classroom. We do Socratic seminars. We do role plays of the Renaissance and other events. This can all be transferred over to a discussion board and can be a very effective assessment when constructed appropriately. This is an example of probing facts and just basic knowledge. I give the students an article, The Changing Face of Poverty, and I give the students a set of open-ended questions, asking them to respond, require a follow-up post. You'll notice in here that my follow-up posts do not just say comment to the response of your classmate. I'm very specific in terms of word length and asking them to bring to the discussion a real-life example of poverty as it exists in the US today. Now, some other things to note about this assignment. Firm deadlines: Tuesday, 8 a.m. for the original. Follow-up post by Thursday, 8 a.m. You want to be as specific as possible. Support or refute a stance, assumption, or interpretation. So I'm asking the students to build an argument here. This particular question I used at the end of President Obama's second term, and it was to fill or not to fill a Supreme question. Should the United States Senate conduct confirmation hearings for a Supreme Court vacancy in a presidential election year? And this is one case where the students absolutely needed to be courteous and respectful. There were varying degrees of opinions, and as you can imagine, it was a very stimulating discussion. This is a post that I used for a sociology course. I asked the students to view clips, which I provided from Disney's Mulan and The Lion King, respond to a set of questions, again, 150 words, 100 words for the follow-up comments, and then for the follow-up comments, again, specific. Include whether or not you believe the media has a strong influence on what we perceive as appropriate gender roles in your follow-up responses. So I'm asking those students to do something specific, not just comment on each other's responses. This asks the student to examine causal relationships. This was from a European history course. I had them read Mercantilism Reconsidered and watch a video, Bubble in South Seas. And again, specific word count, specific deadlines, and what I wanted them to say in their follow-up posts. Should advance the conversation by referencing at least one outside source. Please cite this properly using MLA and provide the URL. This is from an English course. It focuses on the great debaters. The student watched the movie, and this asks the students to come up with an alternative ending to the movie. Post it in the discussion board, must be a full page, deal with all 5 central characters. Again, deadlines are indicated. And then in the follow-up response, comment on the plausibility of the suggestions made in the post of at least 2 of your classmates. This is the Reformation Roundtable, a role play. Students are taking on the role of a historical figure, be it Luther, Calvin, French clergyman, somebody more general. And it's a persuasive piece. So they're trying to persuade the others to share his or her beliefs. So it requires research. It requires the students to develop an argument. And then when they go back in the follow-up comments, they're going to respond as to how convinced they are by the character in the role play situation. This is a follow-up to a lesson on World War I, sends the students to the UK's National Archives, and the students have a choice here. So there's some ownership involved in terms of their learning. They get to choose the documents from those that are posted there. And this says, list and post the 3 most important motivations behind the policy of appeasement and the reasons for them. Return to the discussion, and then when the students come back in, they're commenting on each other's reasons, and the end product is going to be a definitive list of the top 3 items that would represent a consensus for the entire class. Some important things to remember then when constructing the discussion board assignments and also grading them. Give feedback on the quality of the contributions, on the depth of the discussion, on how well the student is really understanding what you're asking in that particular assignment. Use a grading rubric to ensure consistent evaluation. Some other things you can incorporate: self and peer assessments. Have the students grade each other using the rubric. Have them create their own rubric to grade a given discussion board assignment. Solicit student feedback experience. And I always do this. Typically at the end of the year, I survey my students to get feedback on assignments, my teaching, discussion boards, all of that. In the situation we're in right now, my plan is to survey those students before the end of the first marking period so that I can continually use that and incorporate that in my teaching. And that survey, of course, should be anonymous, usually lends for more honest feedback in that case. This is, whoops, apologize for that. These are some testimonials from my students, and this one student focused on deeper thought. Because online discussions provide more time and preparation for in-depth reflection, virtual discussions are of higher quality than the average classroom discussion. This came from students. Critical skills. Discussion boards help me develop and further develop my thinking and writing skills. Online discussions are effective. They allow students to share and respond to each other's ideas and work. And I think this was the biggest one. They allowed students to share. The students really liked that. And they also liked the time preparation as opposed to conducting a verbal discussion face-to-face. This is one of my rubrics. I have several different ones, obviously based on the course, whether I'm teaching history or I'm teaching sociology. I also sometimes use a point system, something that's clear to understand. I use letter grades. There's no right or wrong way to do that, as long as the elements within the rubric are clear and easily understood by the students. And as I said, I like to go over the rubric with the students before the assignment so that there's transparency and the students understand what's expected of them and how to go about completing the assignment to meet the requirements of that rubric. Some things to do, and these are just tips for promoting effective dialogue in using discussion boards as assessments. Encourage the students to respond to orphan comments, meaning those that others do not seem to be responding to. I often go in and seek them out and myself respond to those orphan comments to get the discussion going and to help make the student who owns that comment feel more part of the class and that he or she is participating and interacting. When quieter students do participate, I go out of my way to give positive feedback and encouraging email. At the end of a discussion board, you can often reach some closure by using some synthesis and summary questions, and also alternating assigning tasks to individual students, having the student do that bit of closure, having a student go in and assign some summary questions, or a group of students create those summary questions, rotate through different groups as you do different discussion board assignments. Encourage students to support arguments with evidence, encourage building on existing ideas, quoting, paraphrasing, finding outside resources, using the citation method that's appropriate, whether it's MLA, APA, or Chicago, requiring replies to comments to their own posts. So if Sally makes an original post, John responds to Sally, Sally's required to respond to John, and reinforcing the environment as a place to celebrate all of our ignorance with regard to some issues, our imperfections, confusion, struggles, as well as our strengths and all of those things that we have as gifts and talents. Some things that need to be adapted to the online discussion board. Obviously, students need to adapt to that. Teachers need to adapt to it as well. We can provide more information, instruction, tips through announcement pages, assignment feedback emails, in addition to the discussion board instructions itself. Student needs to feel comfortable asking questions. We want to make sure we develop that rapport where students feel comfortable emailing if the student does not understand the instructions. The discussion board, as I said, the feedback I get from students really is positive in the direction of being less intimidating and less time pressure on the students because they have time to prepare their posts. Reticent students often more likely to participate. I mentioned that student who's the A student but does not raise his or her hand in class. That student likely participates to a much greater extent in an online discussion board. And also we want to maintain that connection. We all know that remote learning for some students makes them feel isolated to a certain degree, and we certainly do not want to happen. We want to continue to build that community and that rapport and strengthen those relationships, and that can be done through the online forum. Instructor's role then, just sort of recapping, introducing navigation and expectations. I have a little snippet from my course on Canvas where I have my week 1 checklist and my expectations, great and otherwise. And I describe all of my learning expectations in that, how I will be graded. It describes the breakdown of grading for the course, and then also links to a discussion board rubric for the students to review before we approach our first discussion board. Another idea that you can implement is to have an FAQ page for the students with some frequently asked questions. Use the announcements, maybe they appear on your homepage or elsewhere in whatever system you're using. Encourage questions and always manage the students' expectations of turnaround time on an assignment. Students who are new to your classroom, sometimes they expect that turnaround time to be just a day or two. If that's not what your school is requiring, say you have a 5-day turnaround time, 7-day on an assignment, students need to know that so that they understand when they will receive those grades and that feedback. Students are also going to struggle. Nothing is ever 100% and does not flow well right out of the gate all of the time. Make sure that the expectations are clear, directions are clear, they feel connected. Try to give those who procrastinate a nudge, a very gentle, friendly nudge, but a nudge nonetheless. And always intercede if there's inappropriate interaction. Jump right in there and put an end to that, whether it's deleting the post, responding to the two students either personally or via email, whatever your situation, if you're remote or hybrid, and making sure those discussions do not run off track. And that's where you can come in and really make a difference, is by making sure that those discussions do not run off track. Post as an instructor, get involved in the discussion, take it another direction, especially if it's stagnant or it seems like the responses are repetitive and getting stale. Intercede, get the discussion back on track, and take it in a different direction. This is an example of how I set up one of my discussions in Canvas. I start with learning objectives. I provide the students instructions, and then I recap and provide this section called expectations. It's just a summary of the instructions. I always feel like if you tell them and then you tell them again, they are much more likely to understand those directions and respond to exactly what you want, instead of just doing part of the assignment or not doing it quite correctly. That's very important. Preventing stagnancy, vary the structure of discussions, role play, debate, mock trial, prioritization. Even in a business class, you can develop sort of a mock Shark Tank that works on a discussion as well. Vary the group size. Most of the LMS platforms allow you to create smaller groups so that you can have the entire class participating in a discussion board, or you can limit to smaller groups of students, particularly if you're creating a product or a collaborative piece. Maybe it's a PowerPoint presentation or something on Screencast-O-Matic. That's very good to do. Stress the value of participation to individuals and the online class, that this is a discussion. If everyone's not participating according to the timeline, you're not having a discussion. You're just having individual posts with no interaction going on. And encourage communication via email. Encourage the students to inquire when they find something to be difficult, confusing, or unclear. Model what you ask them to do. If you're asking them to use citations, model those citations. Use academic language and tone. Closing post with an open-ended question. I like this. Students often do this. They respond in a paragraph or two, whatever's required, and then they'll end with a question which furthers the discussion. And it gives students who respond to them something to which they can respond. What I do not allow my students to do is in the follow-up comment to simply pose one question. That does not get credit. And typically I ask for at least 100 words in those follow-up questions anyway. But just a single question, student says, oh, but I'm advancing the discussion. Well, you just posed a question. You didn't really comment or respond. So that doesn't meet the criteria. Attribution, citation of sources, I mentioned that. Length and quality of response. Those are things that you want to be very specific about. So best practices: provide a word count, indicate number of required posts, stagger the deadlines, use users most posts before seeing replies, allow threaded replies, and it should be a weighted grade for the assessment. Obviously ours are all. So I just like to end with this quote, and that is, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled, from Plutarch. My email address is on the bottom, mjames@unioncatholic.org. Thank you for joining me today.